A boy came into an alley to retrieve a soccer ball. He noticed that the nearby glass was covered with insects. Curious, he tapped on the glass, and suddenly the insects scattered, revealing the corpse of an old man, which frightened the boy and caused him to crouch down on the ground. The police quickly sealed off the scene and preliminarily determined it was a natural death. However, one of the officers felt that something wasn't quite right. Just a few days prior, a similar case had appeared in the area. The victim was also an elderly empty nester who, before dying, had been fatally struck on the head with a blunt object and then thrown into a lake. The police claimed it was most likely because the person had been living alone for a long time without anyone visiting, leading to the death going undiscovered for so long. The speaker didn't mean anything by it, but the listener took it to heart. The landlord was well known in the community for having a sharp tongue but a soft heart. He would often go to some tenants' homes to collect rent, claiming that if they couldn't pay, he would kick them out. So, his public image was that of a sarcastic and harsh person. However, despite his aggressive demeanor, he had never actually followed through on truly throwing someone out. After hearing the police's words, the landlord also thought of a lonely old man among his tenants. So, that evening, the landlord went to the man's residence again. When he knocked, there was no response. Gently pulling on the door, he found the lock was already broken. After entering, the landlord discovered the room was empty, but a feast was laid out on the table. Just then, the tenants suddenly returned. Seeing the tenant carrying liquor, the landlord questioned why he had money to buy fine wine and food but not to pay rent. After scolding him, the landlord turned to leave. However, the tenant invited the landlord to stay, claiming today's meal was his treat. He had previously worked as a criminal investigator for a few years, which should have been a great job, but he had ruined it for himself, leading to his current wretched state. The tenant mentioned hearing about elderly people suffering unnatural deaths recently, always occurring on Wednesdays, and today happened to be Wednesday. The landlord didn't believe this reasoning, thinking the tenant was talking nonsense, so he turned to leave. But as he left, he also warned the tenant to pay his rent and said he would help fix the door lock tomorrow. However, unbeknownst to the landlord, not long after he left, the sleeping tenant was awakened by the cold wind. He was about to go pull the door tightly shut when a man suddenly appeared behind him and wrapped his hands around the tenant's neck. The next day, as the landlord was about to change the tenant's lock, a girl appeared before him. She was also one of the landlord's tenants, but because she was using all the money she earned to treat her mother's illness, she was also behind on rent by a few months. The landlord didn't give the girl too much trouble, just urging her to pay rent as usual and gather the money soon, otherwise he would have to kick her out. After saying this, he started going upstairs to change the tenant's door lock. However, just after finishing, he noticed there was no sound of talking in the room. At this point, the landlord assumed the tenant was sleeping in and went to call for him. Suddenly, he saw the tenant had died a tragic death at home, frightening the landlord and causing him to collapse on the ground. This film has been called the pinnacle of Korean R-rated movies in the past 30 years, with the murder, dismemberment and other plots serving as mere appetizers. Due to copyright restrictions, I can only bring you the story up to this point. The title of the movie is something that must be captured.